Welcome back, everybody. Before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our deep dives. Okay, so let's jump right in. Today we're diving into a potential tropical storm that's brewing in the Caribbean and what it could mean for Florida, especially for those of you listening in the Sunshine State. Our main source today is this AccuWeather article detailing the current meteorological situation. And it's got me thinking, could Florida be facing another hurricane? And how strong could it be?
Well, it's certainly a possibility. What's interesting here is that we're seeing a classic setup for tropical storm development. The article talks about a zone of showers and thunderstorms gathering in the central Caribbean.
Right.
And that's prime real estate for these kinds of weather events.
Okay, so we've got this cluster of storms, and AccuWeather is predicting it could become Tropical Storm Sara later this week. They're highlighting those perfect conditions. Low wind shear and water temperatures in the 80s Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us a bit? What exactly is wind shear and why does it matter?
So think of wind shear like strong breezes high up in the atmosphere. If you have high wind shear, it's like trying to build a house of cards on a windy day. It just won't hold up. The same goes for tropical storms. High wind shear can disrupt the formation of a storm or weaken an existing one, but low wind shear, on the other hand, creates a calm environment where a storm can potentially gain strength.
So in this case, the warm water is like fuel for the storm, and the low wind shear is giving it space to grow.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the concerning part, the hurricane potential. AccuWeather says there's a significant chance this system could become a hurricane, particularly if it doesn't make landfall in Central America first.
Exactly. And remember, this would be the 12th hurricane of the season, which is well above the historical average of 7. This has been a much more active hurricane season than usual, and it really highlights the vulnerability of Florida's coastline.
Wow, 12 hurricanes already. I remember Hurricane Andrew back in '92. That was intense. It makes you wonder what Florida will face in the coming years with this kind of activity. So let's talk about Florida specifically. The article outlines two possible scenarios, both with implications for the state. The first involves a high-pressure system along the Atlantic coast. Can you walk us through how that might influence the storm's path and intensity?
Sure, a high-pressure system is like a big bubble of stable sinking air. If this high-pressure system stays put along the Atlantic coast, it could act like a barrier pushing the storm westward towards Central America or Mexico. That could weaken the storm before it reaches Florida.
So in that scenario, Florida might dodge a bullet.
Potentially, yes. But the second scenario is where things get a bit more concerning. If that high-pressure system moves away quickly, it opens up a path for the storm to track between Cuba and Mexico right into the Gulf of Mexico. And once it's in the Gulf,
It could really pick up steam and potentially head straight for the Florida Keys and the Southern Peninsula.
exactly. And what's important to remember is that hurricanes are notoriously unpredictable. Both of these scenarios are plausible right now, and that's why it's crucial for anyone in Florida, especially along the coast, to monitor the situation closely.
That's right. It's all about being prepared and informed. Now, we've talked about wind shear and warm water, but let's delve a little deeper into some of the potential impacts this storm could have on Florida. We've mentioned wind and rain, but storm surge is another major threat we need to consider.
That's right, storm surge. Can you break that down for us? What exactly is storm surge and why is it so dangerous, especially for Florida?
So storm surge is basically a rise in sea level caused by a hurricane's powerful winds. As the hurricane approaches the coast, those winds push water towards the shore, piling it up and causing the sea level to rise dramatically. It can inundate coastal areas, leading to widespread flooding and significant damage.
And I imagine the Florida Keys and the Southern Peninsula with their low-lying coastal areas are particularly vulnerable to storm surge. Absolutely. The geography of those areas makes them highly susceptible. Even a relatively small increase in sea level due to storm surge can have a devastating impact. We've seen it time and time again with past hurricanes. Remember Hurricane Irma back in 2017?
Oh, yeah.
The storm surge caused significant flooding along Florida's west coast, and the Keys were hit especially hard.
That's right. I remember seeing those images on the news. So let's say this potential hurricane does head towards Florida.
Yeah.
What can people in those vulnerable areas do to prepare for storm surge?
First and foremost, know your evacuation zone. If local authorities issue an evacuation order, don't hesitate, leave. It's not worth risking your life. And it's crucial to have a plan in place well before a storm hits. Know where you're going to go, how you'll get there, and what you need to take with you. Have a go bag ready with essentials like water, food, medication, important documents, and a flashlight.
That makes sense. Don't wait till the last minute to figure things out. And besides evacuating, are there other practical steps people can take to protect their homes and belongings from storm surge?
Absolutely. Secure your property as best as you can. Bring in anything that could become a projectile in high winds, patio furniture, grills, anything loose. Board up windows if you have the materials, and if possible, elevate important belongings to higher floors. Every little bit helps.
These are all great points. It's easy to feel overwhelmed when facing a potential hurricane. But taking these practical steps and having a plan can make a world of difference. We mentioned earlier that this hurricane season has been particularly active. Do you think there's a connection between that and climate change?
Well, that's a complex question, and scientists are still studying the precise relationship between climate change and hurricane activity. What we do know is that warmer ocean temperatures provide more fuel for hurricanes, potentially making them stronger and more intense. And as the climate continues to warm, we can expect to see those ocean temperatures rise even further.
So even if we can't definitively say that climate change is directly causing more hurricanes, it could be contributing to their intensity, which is a major concern for Florida.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the importance of preparation and adaptation. Florida is on the front lines of climate change, and we need to start thinking long term. What innovative solutions or adaptations could we explore to help coastal communities become more resilient in the face of these powerful storms?
That's a critical question and one that deserves a deep dive of its own. For now, though, let's get back to this developing storm. AccuWeather highlights that this system has the potential to rapidly intensify, particularly if it enters the Gulf of Mexico. Can you explain what factors contribute to rapid intensification and why it's such a concern for forecasting and preparedness?
Sure. Rapid intensification is a phenomenon where a hurricane's maximum sustained wind speeds increase by at least 35 miles per hour within a 24-hour period. It's often fueled by a combination of factors, including those warm ocean temperatures we talked about earlier, low wind shear, and a moist atmosphere. Essentially, it's like the perfect recipe for a hurricane to power up quickly.
So if this storm does enter the Gulf and encounters those prime conditions, it could become a major hurricane very quickly. That's a scary thought. And with rapid intensification, it can be challenging for meteorologists to accurately predict the storm's strength and path, right?
Absolutely. Rapid intensification can make forecasting more difficult, which makes preparedness even more crucial. It's like trying to hit a moving target. The storm can strengthen and change direction much faster than anticipated, leaving less time for people to prepare and evacuate if necessary.
That underscores the need for people to stay informed, monitor the forecast closely, and not wait until the last minute to take action. Thinking about the potential impacts of this storm on Florida, it's striking how vulnerable the state's infrastructure is to hurricanes. We've seen in the past how hurricanes can knock out power, disrupt transportation, and damage critical facilities. It makes me wonder what steps can be taken to make Florida's infrastructure more resilient to these kinds of events.
That's a great question, and it's something that Florida is actively grappling with. There are a number of strategies being explored, from hardening power grids and communication systems to investing in more robust building codes and flood mitigation projects. It's a multifaceted challenge that requires a long-term vision and commitment to adaptation.
It sounds like a complex issue with no easy solutions. But it's clear that investing in resilience is crucial for Florida's future. Now, while we've been focused on the potential hurricane threat, the AccuWeather article also mentions another tropical system out in the Atlantic, Hurricane Oscar. Can you give us an update on that storm and whether it poses any risk to Florida?
So Hurricane Oscar is currently a Category 2 hurricane located well out in the Atlantic, far from any landmass. Fortunately, it's not expected to pose any threat to Florida. The current forecast track shows it curving northward and staying out to sea. So for now, it's not a concern for the U.S. East Coast.
That's good news. It sounds like we can focus our attention on this developing system in the Caribbean and its potential impact on Florida. As we've been discussing this potential hurricane threat, I've been thinking about the psychological toll these storms can take on people, especially those who have lived through devastating hurricanes in the past. The anxiety and uncertainty can be overwhelming. What advice would you give to those who might be feeling anxious or stressed about this developing situation?
That's an important point. Hurricanes are not just physical events, they also have a significant psychological impact. My advice would be to acknowledge those feelings of anxiety and stress. It's perfectly normal to feel that way. Talk to friends, family, or a mental health professional if you need support. And remember, preparation is empowering. Taking practical steps to prepare for a potential storm can help alleviate some of that anxiety and give you a sense of control.
That's great advice. Don't be afraid to reach out for help and support if you need it. And remember, we're all in this together. Now, before we wrap up, let's circle back to one key point we touched on earlier. We talked about the potential for this storm to rapidly intensify if it enters the Gulf of Mexico. That's a big concern, especially for forecasting and preparedness efforts. For our listeners in Florida, what should they be doing right now to stay safe and informed?
Well, it really comes down to preparedness and vigilance. First and foremost, stay informed. Monitor the forecasts from reliable sources like the National Hurricane Center and your local news. Pay attention to any watches or warnings issued for your area.
So don't just check the weather app once a day. Stay updated as the situation evolves.
Exactly, and this is where those practical steps we talked about earlier come in. Make sure you have a hurricane kit ready with essentials like water, non-perishable food batteries, flashlights, a first aid kit, and any medications you need. If you have any important documents, keep them in a waterproof container. And as we discussed, knowing your evacuation zone is crucial. If an evacuation order is issued, don't hesitate, just go.
It's better be safe than sorry. Now, you mentioned the National Hurricane Center. They're the go-to source for hurricane information, right?
Yeah.
What kind of resources do they offer, especially for those in Florida who might be in this storm's path?
Yeah, the National Hurricane Center website is a treasure trove of information. You can find the latest forecasts, tracking maps, satellite imagery, and safety tips. They also have a really helpful interactive storm surge risk map where you can plug in your address and see what level of surge you might expect in different scenarios. I highly recommend checking that out.
That sounds incredibly useful. We'll be sure to include a link to that in our show notes. It's amazing how technology can help us prepare for these events. Now, looking beyond this specific storm, we've talked about how this hurricane season has been particularly active and how climate change might be playing a role in intensifying these storms. It raises the question, what does the future hold for Florida in terms of hurricane risk? Well, that's the million-dollar question, and unfortunately, it's not an easy one to answer. Scientists are working on predicting future hurricane activity, but there are a lot of variables involved. What we do know is that as the climate continues to warm, the conditions that fuel hurricanes, like warmer ocean temperatures, are likely to become more prevalent. This means that Florida, with its long coastline and vulnerability to hurricanes, will likely face an increased risk in the years to come.
That's a sobering thought. So it's not just about weathering this particular storm. It's about preparing for a future where these events might become even more frequent and intense. Absolutely. It's about building resilience. We need to be thinking long-term about how to adapt to this changing reality. This means investing in stronger infrastructure, exploring innovative solutions like seawalls and elevated construction, and having frank conversations about managed retreat in some areas. It's a complex challenge, but one that Florida needs to address head-on.
It sounds like there's a lot to consider. Well, I think this has been a really insightful deep dive into the developing situation with this potential tropical storm and the broader implications for Florida. We've covered a lot of ground, from the science of hurricanes to the importance of preparedness and the long-term challenges facing the state.
It's been a pleasure discussing this with you, and I hope our listeners in Florida feel more informed and empowered to take action. Remember, staying informed and being prepared are the best defenses against these powerful storms.
Couldn't agree more. And for our listeners who want to delve deeper into this topic, we'll include links to all the resources we mentioned in our show notes. Stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you on our next deep dive.